That night at midnight, American helicopters landed in Caracas. Within 30 minutes, President Nicolas Maduro was in handcuffs on an aircraft carrier. The official story: drug trafficking charges, narco-terrorism, justice being served. But that's not what this was about. Not even close. Look, I need you to understand something that most people are missing. This operation, this middle-of-the-night raid that kidnapped a sitting head of state, this wasn't about cocaine or cartels or any of the official justifications. This was about China. And it might be the opening move in a confrontation that reshapes the entire global order. While you were watching headlines about a drug lord getting arrested, something far more significant was happening. The United States just fired the first shot in an economic war with China. In Latin America. In our own backyard. And the Venezuela operation was designed to send one message to every government in the region: align with China and this is what happens to you. Let me show you what's really going on. Because this story starts 20 years ago. While America was distracted fighting wars in the Middle East, China quietly, systematically bought Latin America. Not with tanks. With trade deals and infrastructure projects. And by the time anyone in Washington noticed, it was already too late. In the year 2000, Chinese trade with Latin America was $12 billion. $12 billion. That's nothing in global trade terms. The United States was the undisputed economic power in the Western Hemisphere. China was barely on the radar. Then watch what happens. 2005, $50 billion. 2023, $180 billion. 2015, $260 billion. 2023, $115 billion. 2024, $518 billion. That's a 40-fold increase in 24 years. While America was bleeding resources in Iraq and Afghanistan, China was signing contracts in Brazil and Chile and Peru. And it wasn't just the money, it was strategic. China became the #1 trading partner for Brazil, the 7th largest economy in the world. For Chile, the world's biggest copper producer. For Peru with its mineral wealth. For Uruguay. For Argentina. Every major South American economy that matters, China displaced the United States as primary trading partner. The Monroe Doctrine, that 200-year-old policy saying the Western Hemisphere belongs to American influence, it got shredded. Not by military conquest. By shipping containers and investment deals. And American policymakers finally woke up and realized we lost our backyard without anyone firing a shot. But trade numbers are abstract. Let me show you what this looks like in concrete terms. Literally concrete. In November 2024, China opened a port in Peru called Chancay. This isn't some small facility. We're talking about a $3.5 billion deep-water megaport, bigger than anything America has in the region. This port creates a direct shipping corridor from Shanghai to South America that completely bypasses North American ports. A voyage that used to take 35 days now takes 23. Shipping costs dropped by 20%. China's ambassador called it the Shanghai of South America. Peru's government wants it to become the Singapore of Latin America. And here's the really strategic part. China and Brazil are now discussing building a railway across the entire South American continent. From Chancay on the Pacific through the Andes across the Amazon to Brazil's Atlantic coast. A Chinese-controlled transcontinental corridor that would create an alternative to the Panama Canal itself. Think about what that means. Chinese goods land at Chancay. They're loaded onto trains controlled by Chinese companies. They cross the continent on Chinese-built railways. They're loaded onto ships on the other side and sent to Europe or Africa. The entire logistics network of South American trade flowing through Chinese infrastructure. But ports are visible. Everyone can see them on satellite images. Let me tell you about the infrastructure you can't see. The kind that gives China something far more dangerous. A kill switch. State Grid Corporation of China. If you've never heard of them, you should have. They're the world's largest utility company. And for the last 15 years they've been buying and building electrical infrastructure across Latin America. In Brazil alone, they've invested $12.5 billion. They built ultra-high voltage transmission lines stretching over 2,000 kilometers. These are the massive backbone lines that carry electricity from power plants to cities. And State Grid doesn't just build this infrastructure. They own it. They operate it. They control it. If you live in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, there's a very real chance your lights stay on because China decides they should. That's not an exaggeration. State Grid controls critical portions of the power grid supplying 40 million Brazilians. The software running those systems, developed in China. The spare parts needed for maintenance, supplied from China. The personnel operating the control systems trained by Chinese engineers. Now imagine what happens during a conflict. Imagine tensions between the United States and China escalate over Taiwan or trade. America pressures Brazil to take a side, to restrict Chinese access to Brazilian ports or resources, and Brazil hesitates, tries to stay neutral. What leverage does China have? Well, they control the power keeping lights on in the two largest cities in South America. They don't even need to make explicit threats. The implicit leverage is obvious. Cross us and maybe there are technical difficulties. Maybe maintenance takes longer. Maybe spare parts are delayed. This is economic coercion through infrastructure dependency. And it's not just Brazil. State Grid has similar investments in Chile, in Peru, in Argentina. Across Latin America, Chinese companies own and operate critical infrastructure that modern societies need to function. But here's where it gets really serious. Here's why Venezuela happened. There's a resource that determines who wins the 21st century, a metal that makes everything electronic in your life possible. And China has been locking up the global supply. Lithium, the battery metal, the one in your phone, your laptop, your electric car, the one that stores solar and wind energy, the one that makes the entire green energy transition possible. Without lithium, there are no electric vehicles. There is no energy independence. There is no technological future. And there's a region in South America they call the Lithium Triangle. Bolivia, Argentina, Chile. It holds 60% of the world's proven lithium reserves. 60% shale produces the most right now. Argentina is ramping up production. But Bolivia has the largest reserves, double what Chile has. Massive salt flats in the Andes containing enough lithium to power hundreds of millions of electric vehicles. And until very recently, Bolivia's state lithium company had billion-dollar deals with China's KDL, the world's largest battery manufacturer, and with Russia's Uranium One. Chinese companies were developing the extraction technology, building the processing facilities, controlling the entire supply chain from salt flat to finished battery. Meanwhile, American companies had almost nothing, because American companies wanted traditional contracts with strong property rights. Bolivia wanted state control and technology transfer, so American companies walked away. Chinese companies said, sure, we'll work under your terms. Fast forward to 2024. Joe Biden committed America to an aggressive green energy transition. 50% electric vehicles by 2030. Massive battery storage investments. This is official policy, billions in subsidies committed. But where do the batteries come from? Tesla needs lithium. Ford needs lithium. GM needs lithium. Every American automaker making electric vehicles needs massive amounts of lithium. And 60% of global supply is in South America, increasingly controlled by Chinese contracts. This is a strategic nightmare. America's energy independence, our climate goals, our automotive industry, all of it depends on a resource in our own hemisphere that China spent 15 years locking up. It's like realizing the rope you're hanging yourself with is being held by your adversary. Now, do you understand why Venezuela happened? This wasn't about Maduro. This wasn't about drugs. This was about sending a message to every government in Latin America. This was about China's resource empire in America's backyard. And this was about Trump deciding that's over. The Donroe Doctrine. That's what they're calling it now. Trump's version of the Monroe Doctrine on steroids. And it has 4 pillars. Pillar 1, the Western Hemisphere is priority number 1. Trump's national security strategy devotes 5 pages specifically to Latin America. More than Europe, more than Asia. The document explicitly identifies non-hemispheric competitors, that's code for China, as existential threats. Pillar 2, economic coercion as the primary tool. Liberation Day tariffs. 10% baseline on all imports. But the real weapon is secondary sanctions. Countries that maintain Chinese economic relationships face escalating penalties. The message is explicit: you can trade with China or you can trade with us. Pick one. Mexico already got this message. Under heavy pressure, President Sheinbaum's government is advancing legislation imposing tariffs up to 50% on Chinese goods. Not because Mexico wants to, because America demanded it. Pillar 3. Military force is on the table. Venezuela proved this. 2 a.m., 30 minutes. Maduro in handcuffs. This operation was designed to show every Latin American government that America will use force if necessary. And we won't ask permission from anyone. Secretary of State Marco Rubio went to Panama right after taking office. He delivered a simple message: reduce Chinese influence over the canal or face American measures. Panama got the message. The Hong Kong company operating ports at both ends of the canal is now selling to an American consortium. Panama withdrew from China's Belt and Road Initiative. Pillar 4 carrot and stick. Bolivia's new president takes office and immediately terminates Chinese lithium contracts. Washington offers IMF credit lines, development bank financing, technology transfers. Argentina's Milei aligns with Trump and gets preferential trade treatment. The pattern is clear. Align with us, you get rewarded. Resist us, you get what Maduro got. So the hemisphere is being sorted. Countries are making choices, some enthusiastically. Argentina didn't need convincing. Some are being coerced. Panama folded, Bolivia pivoted, and some are resisting. Brazil won't abandon its China relationship easily. Cuba and Nicaragua are ideologically committed to resisting. But the era of multi-alignment, where Latin American countries could play Washington against Beijing and benefit from both, that's over. The Donroe Doctrine is forcing a choice, and the consequences of choosing wrong have been made very clear. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because America has military power and control over dollar-based financial systems. But China has something else, something that might prove more durable. Here's a quote that explains everything. America offered ideology. China offered concrete, literally concrete. In the last 20 years, how many ports has the United States built in Latin America? How many power grids? How many railways? The answer is close to zero. America sends advisors. We fund anti-corruption programs. We provide military training. But actual physical infrastructure that improves daily life, we don't do that anymore. China shows up with plans and money and construction crews. You want a port? Here's $3.5 billion. You want power lines? Here's $12 billion. No lectures about democracy. No demands for reforms. Just sign here. Construction starts next month. And it's not just more infrastructure. It's infrastructure with fewer strings. American investment comes with conditions, transparency requirements, labor standards, environmental protections. Chinese investment comes with one condition: don't recognize Taiwan. That's it. For a Latin American government trying to deliver visible improvements to voters, the choice is obvious. Take American advice and wait a decade. Or take Chinese money and break ground next year. And here's what happened in 2025 while the Donroe Doctrine was being rolled out. In May, Xi Jinping hosted the 4th China CELAC Forum in Beijing. Leaders from across Latin America attended. Xi announced $9 billion in new credit lines. Free trade agreements were signed with Ecuador and Nicaragua. Colombia joined the Belt and Road Initiative despite American pressure. And the trade numbers tell the story. Chinese exports to Latin America grew 8% in 2025. At the same time, Chinese exports to the United States fell 18% because of tariffs. Beijing is adapting, finding new routes, new partners, new ways to maintain position. So what does this mean for whether the Donroe Doctrine succeeds? Some countries will comply because they have no choice. Mexico is too dependent on America. Panama is too vulnerable. Small Central American countries can't resist. But others will resist. Brazil isn't giving up $150 billion in Chinese investment without a fight. And here's the interesting part. American pressure might actually push fence-sitters toward China. Because if you're a Latin American leader and Washington is demanding you choose, and Beijing is offering massive investments with no political conditions, what do you choose? Fear of America is powerful. But resentment of American ultimatums is also powerful. And if enough countries decide they'd rather take their chances with Chinese partnership than submit to American threats, the Donroe Doctrine creates exactly what it's trying to prevent. A coordinated Latin American move away from American influence. There's a concept called soft power, the ability to shape others through attraction rather than coercion. America used to master this. Countries wanted to align with us because being in the American orbit meant prosperity and security. We lost that through neglect. While China was building ports, America was fighting Middle East wars. We assumed Latin America would stay in our orbit because of geography. We didn't think we needed to work for it. Now we're trying to win back influence through coercion. And the problem with coercion is it requires constant pressure. The moment you ease up, countries revert to pursuing their own interests, which increasingly means working with China. China is playing a long game. They're not trying to outcompete American military power. They're building economic dependencies that will outlast any short-term pressure campaign. Infrastructure lasts decades. Trade relationships compound over time. Once you've reorganized your economy around Chinese supply chains, switching back is extraordinarily expensive. The Donroe Doctrine is a short-term play using American strengths, military power, financial leverage, But China is playing for 2040, for 2050. They're building foundations of influence that will outlast any particular administration. And here's the uncomfortable question. What happens when Trump leaves office? What happens when the next administration decides the Donroe Doctrine is too aggressive? Do all these countries that complied under threats flip back to China? Probably. That's the vulnerability of coercion-based strategy. It requires constant maintenance, sustained political will, being willing to follow through on threats forever. Are we willing to do that? History suggests not. So let me walk you through how this could end. There are 3 scenarios, and in all of them, Latin America loses. Scenario 1, America wins through total coercion. The pressure becomes overwhelming. Country after country buckles. Chinese influence gets systematically expelled. The ports get sold to American companies. Power grids transferred. Lithium goes to American firms. By 2030, Latin America is back in the American sphere. What's the cost? Economic depression for countries that resisted. Political instability everywhere. Coups, regime changes. The return of CIA interventions and military juntas. Latin America becomes subject states, not partners. They do what Washington says because they have to. But there's no genuine alliance. Just compliance backed by threat. Scenario 2, perpetual proxy conflict. The pressure succeeds in some countries, fails in others. Mexico and Central America fall in line. But Brazil resists. The hemisphere splits. American bloc in the north, Chinese sphere in the south, and the line between them becomes a zone of perpetual conflict. Elections become battlegrounds. American and Chinese money pouring into campaigns. Intelligence services undermining politicians. Coups and counter-coups. Governments rising and falling based on which external power backs them. Cold War 2.0 compressed into one hemisphere. For ordinary people, chronic instability. Investment conditional on politics. Trade disrupted by sanctions. Infrastructure started and abandoned. Constant uncertainty about which way their country is aligned tomorrow. Scenario 3, America loses despite everything. American pressure creates backlash. Latin American nationalism unites countries against the Donroe Doctrine. Brazil, Colombia, maybe Mexico, they form coordinated resistance. They work with China to build systems that bypass American sanctions. They create regional trade agreements excluding the United States. American pressure accelerates the outcome it's trying to prevent. A Latin American bloc aligned with China explicitly rejecting American influence. The Monroe Doctrine doesn't just get challenged, it gets repudiated. And America loses its backyard despite using every available tool. In all 3 scenarios, Latin American agency disappears. Decisions about development, about economics, about politics, those aren't being made based on what's best for those countries. They're being made based on which superpower is more dangerous to cross. There's a saying, when great powers collide, small nations suffer. Korea, Vietnam, Central America during the Cold War. These weren't superpowers, they were battlegrounds where superpowers fought through proxies. Latin America is about to become a battleground again. Not necessarily with tanks, though Venezuela shows that's possible, but with economic coercion, political interference, infrastructure competition, the constant pressure of great powers demanding alignment. And this was avoidable. If America had maintained engagement over the last 2 decades, if we'd competed with China on development, rather than assuming geography-guaranteed influence, we wouldn't need the Donroe Doctrine. But we didn't, we got distracted. And now we're using force to recover what we lost through neglect. That might work short-term, force usually does. But it doesn't create genuine partnerships. It creates resentment waiting for the first opportunity to express itself. The story of the next decade is being written in Washington and Beijing. And 400 million Latin Americans are being told their geography determines their destiny. That being close to America means being subject to America. That sovereignty is conditional on great power permission. The Donroe Doctrine isn't just policy, it's a declaration that multi-alignment is over. That Latin American countries don't chew